At my daughter's wedding, my face was already there, framed at the entrance, not in pride, but as a warning. My photo hung under two cruel words. No entry. I stood there for a moment, the laughter from inside spilling out like music I was never meant to hear. Then I turned around and walked away, each step heavier than the last. 3 hours later, my phone lit up with 23 missed calls. The party inside had changed tone, and for the first time, regret was hers, not mine. Now, before I share what happened next, I'd be grateful if you'd consider giving it a thumbs up. The engine of my old Ford F-150 hummed a familiar, steady tune as I turned off the main highway onto the winding private road. The gravel crunched under the heavy-duty tires, a sound more suited to a construction site than the grand entrance of the Blackwood Manor. I'd spent the better part of the morning polishing the truck's deep blue paint, but it still looked like what it was, a working man's vehicle, honest and unpretentious. It felt out of place here, and for a moment, so did I. The late afternoon sun filtered through the ancient oak trees lining the drive, dappling the path in shifting patterns of gold and shadow. I could smell the rich, damp earth and the sweet perfume of late-blooming roses from the manor's famous gardens. It was a place of quiet, old-world elegance, the kind of place my daughter, Serafina, had always dreamed of. I parked in the designated guest area, deliberately choosing a spot at the far end, away from the gleaming German sedans and luxury SUVs that crowded the front rows. My suit, a dark charcoal wool I'd had tailored for the occasion, felt strange against my skin, too smooth and confining for a man used to the comfortable wear of denim and flannel. It was a concession, a peace offering of sorts, my attempt to fit into the world she was so desperate to build for herself. Straightening my tie, I took a deep breath. This was her day. I was here for her, to watch my only child marry the man she loved. That was all that mattered. I walked toward the grand stone entrance, the distant sound of a string quartet growing clearer with each step, a delicate melody weaving through the air. At my daughter's wedding, my face was already there, framed at the entrance, not in pride, but as a warning. My photo hung under two cruel words. No entry. I stood there for a moment, the laughter from inside spilling out like music I was never meant to hear. That sign was more than an insult. It was a choice she had made. And now I had a choice to make too. If you want to see how one father's quiet decision brought a fairy tale wedding to its knees, keep reading. The frame was ornate, gilded, and heavy, the kind of thing you'd see in a museum. Inside it was my official portrait from a few years back, the one Serafina had insisted I have taken. I was smiling in the picture, a genuine happy smile from a time I thought was simpler. But beneath the expensive glass and the gilded wood, a small hand-carved plaque of dark walnut had been affixed. The letters were elegant, flowing script, burned expertly into the wood. I recognized the style immediately. It was the same lettering I had taught Serafina when she was a girl, when she'd spent hours in my workshop, the smell of sawdust in her hair. The two words felt like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. No entry. For a long minute, I didn't move. I simply stared at the sign, the sound of the string quartet and the murmur of happy guests washing over me. They saw a man being publicly shamed, a father being disowned at the very threshold of his daughter's new life. The warmth of the afternoon sun suddenly felt cold on my skin. The beautiful music now sounded hollow, mocking. It wasn't a mistake. The precision of the carving, the deliberate placement, it was all intentional. This was a message, delivered with the cold, calculated cruelty I was beginning to see was a part of her character. A strange calm washed over me, pushing aside the initial wave of hurt. It wasn't anger that I felt, not yet. It was clarity, a sudden, piercing clarity that cut through years of self-deception and hopeful ignorance. I had spent so long making excuses for her, for the little snubs that grew into bigger slights, for the way she spoke of my work with a faint, apologetic smile, for the way she and her fiancé, Julian, treated me like a relic from a past they were eager to erase. I saw it all now, laid out as clearly as the grain in a freshly cut plank of oak. They didn't just want me to be quiet and stay in the background. They didn't want me there at all. I was a stain on their perfect, polished image. I thought about walking in anyway, about making a scene, about confronting her in front of all her new, important friends. I could feel the words bubbling up inside me, years of frustration and quiet pain. But what would be the point? They had already made their statement. Now I would make mine. Without another glance at the photograph, I turned around. I walked away from the music, from the laughter, from the daughter who had just carved me out of her life. Each step on the gravel path was heavier than the last. A final, somber march away from the man I used to be, the doting father who would have done anything for his little girl. The engine of my Ford started with a low, reliable rumble. It was the sound of my world, a world of substance and hard work, a world I suddenly felt fiercely protective of. 3 hours later, I was sitting in a booth at a 24-hour diner off the interstate, a place called The Crossroads. The vinyl on the seat was cracked, and the air smelled of stale coffee and frying bacon, but it was quiet. It was real. I'd been nursing the same cup of black coffee for over an hour, watching the traffic flow past on the highway, when my phone, which I'd placed face down on the table, began to vibrate. It didn't stop. The screen lit up the dim booth with a frantic, pulsing light. I picked it up. 23 missed calls. Most were from Serafina. A few were from my ex-wife, Eleanor. 2 were from a number I didn't recognize. As I watched, a new text message appeared on the screen. It was from Serafina. The words were stark against the white background, all caps, radiating panic. "Dad, pick up the phone. Something is wrong." I stared at the screen, the panicked words doing nothing to disturb the strange stillness that had settled over me. Across the table, my friend Declan, my only friend, really, took a slow sip of his own coffee. He was a retired accountant, a man of quiet habits and sharp observations, and he'd been sitting with me in near silence ever since I'd called him from the road. He hadn't pressed for details, just listened to the clipped, tense tone of my voice, and told me to meet him at our usual spot. He looked from my phone back to my face, his brow furrowed with a concern I hadn't seen in years. I slid the phone across the Formica tabletop toward him. He read the message, his lips tightening into a thin line, then pushed it back to me. My mind drifted away from the greasy smell of the diner, away from the hum of the refrigerator unit and the clatter of plates in the kitchen. It went back in time, sifting through the years like a carpenter sorting through lumber, looking for the point where the grain had started to turn. The change in Serafina hadn't been sudden. It was a slow erosion, a gradual sanding down of the girl I knew until only a polished, unfamiliar stranger remained. It began when she met Julian in her last year of college. He came from money, the kind of old, effortless wealth that made my life's work, my calloused hands and sawdust-covered boots, seem coarse and primitive. At first, it was subtle. She'd gently suggest I change out of my work clothes before meeting them for dinner. She'd laugh a little too brightly when Julian made a joke about my truck. She started calling my passion, my craft, a hobby. The workshop behind my house, once her favorite place in the world, a sanctuary of creativity and shared projects, became a place she avoided, complaining about the dust. She and Julian spoke of a world of investment portfolios, of summering in the Hamptons, of a life so far removed from mine, it might as well have been on another planet. I told myself it was normal. She was growing up, building her own life. I was supposed to be proud, but a quiet ache had taken root in my chest. The feeling of being left behind, of being carefully edited out of the picture of her new, shiny life. I remembered one conversation clearly about a year ago. We were having one of our increasingly rare dinners together. I was trying to find common ground, to connect with her. I told her I was pouring all my time and resources into something bigger now, a project that was taking everything I had. I mentioned it was a way of preserving something important from the past, but I kept the details to myself. It was my legacy, I'd thought, something I was building for her future. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, not interest, but a kind of pitying condescension. To her, it was just another one of her father's quaint, unprofitable obsessions. She didn't ask for details. She just patted my hand and said, "Well, Dad, as long as it makes you happy." The memory was soured by another, more recent one. Just after she and Julian got engaged, I sat them both down. I wanted to give them a real start, to show them that despite my simple life, I could provide for my daughter. I handed her an envelope containing a cashier's check. I told them it was a generous gift, something to help them get settled, to put a down payment on a place of their own. Serafina's eyes had lit up, and Julian had given me a rare, approving nod. They saw the money, but they didn't see what it represented. Decades of early mornings, of aching backs, of deals made on a handshake and sealed with honest labor. They saw it as their due, a contribution from the old world to fund their new one. "You gonna check the voicemails?" Declan's voice cut through my thoughts, pulling me back to the present. I nodded slowly, my fingers feeling heavy as I navigated the phone's menu. I pressed the button for speakerphone, letting the disembodied voices fill the space between us. The first was from Eleanor, my ex-wife. Her voice was high and strained, laced with a theatrical panic I knew all too well. She went on about how could I just leave, how could I embarrass Serafina on her wedding day, that I was being unbelievably selfish. She never once asked if I was okay. It was all about appearances, about the perfect image being shattered. I deleted her message without a second thought and played the next one. Julian's voice was a low growl, tight with fury. He didn't bother with pleasantries. He reported that I was a pathetic old man, that I had tried to ruin their day out of jealousy, and that I would regret this. He said he would make sure I paid for the humiliation I had caused them. His words were full of venom, the threats of a man whose power came from a bank account, not from character. The threats didn't scare me. They only solidified my resolve. They confirmed everything the sign at the entrance had told me. This wasn't just a slight. It was a declaration of war, and they had no idea how well armed I was. I set the phone down. The last of the hurt had finally burned away, leaving behind something cold, hard, and clear. For years I had been building things, houses, furniture, a life for my daughter. I had worked with my hands, with tangible materials, creating things of lasting value. They, on the other hand, had built a world of illusions, of status and appearances, a house of cards built on my foundation. And I was about to pull that foundation out from under them. The diner suddenly felt like a command center, the worn-out booth a seat of power. The quiet hum of the place was the perfect soundtrack for what was to come. Declan watched me, his expression unreadable. He had seen me at my best and my worst, had been there when my marriage to Eleanor fell apart, had watched me pour my life into raising Serafina. He knew me better than anyone. He pushed his empty cup aside and leaned forward, his voice low. "Caleb, you have a look on your face I haven't seen since that crooked developer tried to cheat you on the old mill restoration. What did you do?" I picked up my coffee cup, the ceramic warm in my hands. I took a slow, deliberate sip, the bitter liquid a welcome jolt. I met my friend's gaze, and for the first time since I'd seen that sign, a faint smile touched my lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had finally accepted the rules of a game he never wanted to play, and was now ready to make his move. "I just followed the instructions on the sign, Deck," I said, my voice even and calm. "And now, I'm going to enforce them." Declan's gaze didn't waver. He simply nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. The question in his eyes was clear, unspoken, but hanging in the greasy air between us. How? I reached down beside me and lifted my laptop case onto the table. It wasn't sleek or modern, just a rugged tool meant for work sites. I opened it and the screen flickered to life, illuminating my face with its cool, blue-white light. "It was supposed to be my gift to her," I began, my voice low. The words meant only for Declan. The whole thing. The wedding. I recounted the evening, 6 months prior, when Serafina and Julian had come to my house for dinner. They had spread brochures for the Blackwood Manor across my sturdy oak dining table, the glossy pages a stark contrast to the hand-hewn wood beneath. They spoke of its history, its prestige, the perfection of it all. Then came the performance, the sighs, the sad glances, the talk of how a dream like that was just out of reach. Julian had mentioned the venue fee, a number with enough zeros to make a man like me whistle, and then looked at me, a hopeful, expectant gleam in his eye. "I told them I would handle it," I continued, my fingers clicking quietly on the keyboard. "I told them to consider the venue and all the arrangements for my wedding gift." Serafina cried. She hugged me and told me I was the best father in the world. The memory tasted like ash in my mouth. Julian shook my hand, a firm, man-to-man grip, as if we were sealing a business deal, and in a way we were. He just didn't understand the terms. I explained to Declan how I'd met with every vendor myself, negotiating every contract. They all thought I was just a proud father, a simple craftsman wanting to give his daughter the best. "You put it all in your name?" Declan asked, his accountant's mind immediately grasping the implications. I nodded, pulling up a folder on the screen labeled Blackwood Project. It was filled with neatly organized files. Every single contract, the power, the water, the catering, the security, all billed to my company account. I did it under the guise of managing the gift, making sure everything was perfect for her. But the truth is, I never trusted Julian to handle a budget. The boy's all polish and no substance. I paused, my cursor hovering over the utility services agreement. And I wanted to protect my investment. Declan let out a low whistle. "You have all the paperwork?" he asked, a note of admiration in his voice. I tapped a finger on the screen. Every invoice, every signed agreement. Scanned, uploaded, and backed up. You don't spend 40 years in this business without learning how to keep meticulous records. It's the first thing you learn. Paperwork is armor. My own words hung in the air. I had built this armor to protect myself from shady contractors and unreliable clients, never imagining I would need it to protect me from my own daughter. The time for reflection was over. It was time for action. My movements were deliberate, unhurried. I was a craftsman at work, and this was just another project, one that required precision and a steady hand. I clicked open the utility agreement. My account number, the service address for the Blackwood Manor, and my own billing address were all clearly displayed. I pulled my phone from my pocket, the screen still showing the last desperate text from Serafina. I ignored it and dialed the number for the regional power company. The automated menu was a familiar maze of prompts and hold music. I navigated it patiently, my coffee growing cold beside me. Finally, a human voice came on the line, a cheerful young woman who sounded like she was smiling. "Thank you for calling West County Electric. This is Brenda. How can I help you today?" I pitched my voice to be polite, calm, the voice of a reasonable business owner facing a minor issue. "Hello, Brenda. My name is Caleb Vance. I'm calling about the service at one of my properties. Account number 91733-B. There was a soft clicking of a keyboard on the other end. Okay, Mr. Vance. I have your account right here, for the property at 1-800 Blackwood Lane. How can I help you? I took a breath. There's been a security breach at the location, I said, the lie smooth and practiced. The event scheduled for this evening has been compromised. For safety and liability reasons, I need to have the power shut off immediately. There was a pause. The cheerful voice was replaced by one of professional concern. Oh, I'm very sorry to hear that, sir. Shut off completely? We usually require 24 hours notice for a service termination. I kept my tone even. I understand that. However, this is an emergency situation. As the account holder, I am authorizing an immediate termination of service. I will assume all associated fees. Please confirm that you can do this for me. More clicking. I could hear her conferring with a supervisor in the background. My heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Declan watched me, his face a mask of concentration. Finally, Brenda's voice returned. All business now. Yes, Mr. Vance. My supervisor has approved the emergency shutoff. I just need to confirm your security password. I gave it to her without hesitation. Thank you, sir. The order has been placed. A technician will remotely disconnect the service. It should be effective within the next 5 to 10 minutes. I thanked her for her time and ended the call, placing the phone back on the table with a soft click. The silence in the diner rushed back in to fill the void. I had done it. The first cut had been made, clean and deep. I felt no joy, no satisfaction, just the grim resolve of a surgeon removing a sickness. It didn't take long. Less than 5 minutes later, my phone began to buzz again, a frantic, insistent vibration against the tabletop. It was the number I didn't recognize from before. It rang once, twice, then stopped. A moment later, it rang again. That'll be the wedding planner, I murmured, looking at the screen. She's the first line of defense. Her job is to solve problems. I let the call go to voicemail, a small, petty act of control. A notification popped up a minute later. I opened the voicemail and put it on speaker. The voice was crisp and professional, but stretched thin with panic. Mr. Vance, this is the event planner. We seem to have a complete power outage here at the manor. The backup generators aren't kicking on for some reason. It's a major issue, and the venue staff is scrambling. Please, call me back as soon as you get this. We need to figure this out. I deleted the message. The detail about the generators brought another grim smile to my face. Just as I was explaining this to Declan, the screen of my phone lit up again, blindingly bright in the dim diner. It wasn't a call this time. It was a new text message, a single, furious line from Julian. The letters were stark, brutal, and filled with impotent rage. What the hell did you just do? The lights are all out. You're going to pay for this, you old bastard! Julian's text message glowed on the screen, a beacon of his fury. I read the words, then read them again, feeling nothing but a distant, analytical curiosity. He was predictable, a storm of bluster and entitlement. He thought his anger was a weapon, but it was just noise. I took a sip of my now cold coffee and looked at Declan. He's angry, I said, my voice flat. Declan glanced at the phone and gave a short, humorless laugh. That's an understatement. The boy's got a thesaurus of insults and not a single good idea. So what's happening in there right now? I didn't have to imagine. I knew exactly what was happening. I had built and restored enough places to know how they breathed, and how they died when you cut off their air supply. Inside the grand ballroom of the Blackwood Manor, the darkness was not complete. It was a murky, disorienting twilight, punctuated by the frantic blue-white beams of cell phone flashlights. The magnificent crystal chandeliers, which had moments ago showered the room in a warm, golden light, now hung like skeletal ghosts from the high, vaulted ceiling. The music from the string quartet had died in a discordant screech, and the ensuing silence had been quickly filled by a rising tide of confused murmurs. The scent of expensive perfume and wilting floral arrangements now mingled with a new, acrid smell. The faint odor of panic. The carefully constructed fantasy had shattered, and the guests, dressed in their finest silks and velvets, were left blinking in the ruins. A woman in a shimmering emerald dress, one of Julian's distant aunts, clutched her husband's arm. Her voice was a sharp, nervous whisper that carried in the sudden quiet. She wondered aloud if this was some kind of power grid failure, a common enough occurrence in the more rural parts of the county during the summer. But her husband, a man with a perpetually unimpressed expression, pointed out that the emergency lights hadn't come on. That was not normal. That suggested a problem not with the grid, but with the building itself. The word problem rippled through the crowd, morphing as it went. Problem became issue became emergency, and emergency became danger. The mood in the room curdled, shifting from elegant celebration to a tense, uncertain gathering of strangers trapped in the dark. Serafina, a vision in white just moments before, was now a frantic silhouette at the center of the chaos. Her dress, a confection of lace and silk worth more than my truck, seemed to glow eerily in the scattered phone lights. She was arguing with the event planner, her voice sharp and brittle. The planner looked frazzled, her face pale and drawn. She kept repeating that the backup generators should have activated automatically, that this was unprecedented. She didn't know that during my last inspection 2 weeks ago, I'd noticed the faulty transfer switch. That afternoon, I'd quietly paid one of my own electricians to delay the repair until the following Monday, citing a parts delay. A small, untraceable investment in the evening's outcome. This was their first public test as a couple, and they were failing spectacularly. Their carefully curated image of grace and control was dissolving in real time, in front of an audience of their most important connections. The guests were no longer guests. They were spectators at a disaster. They watched the bride and groom, not with sympathy, but with a kind of detached, morbid fascination. This would be the story they told for weeks to come. The tale of the high society wedding that had literally crashed and burned. The public humiliation, I realized, was a far more potent weapon than simple darkness. I was not just turning off the lights on their party. I was exposing the faulty wiring of their entire lives. Back in the diner, my phone rang again. This time, it was Serafina. Her name flashed on the screen, and for a fleeting second I felt a pang of something, a ghost of the paternal instinct to fix, to soothe, to make it all better. I crushed it without a second thought. That man, the father who would have rushed to her side, was gone. He had walked out of the Blackwood Manor's gates 3 hours ago and wasn't coming back. I let the phone ring, listening to the shrill electronic tone. Let her wait. Let her feel a fraction of the powerlessness I had felt standing in front of that sign. Declan just watched me, his expression neutral, letting me play this out at my own pace. After the 4th ring, I finally answered, putting the call on speaker. "Dad?" Her voice was a choked, desperate sound, a world away from the confident, dismissive tone she usually used with me. The background was a cacophony of panicked voices and shuffling feet. "Dad, where are you? Something's happened. The power is out, all of it. The generators won't start, and nobody knows what's going on." I let the silence stretch, listening to her ragged breathing. I pictured her standing there in her expensive dress, her perfect hair probably a mess, her carefully applied makeup possibly streaked with tears of frustration. I felt a cold, hard satisfaction that was as clean and sharp as a freshly honed chisel. "I know," I said finally, my voice calm and even. The contrast between my quiet tone and her frantic one was stark. "What do you mean you know?" she demanded, her voice rising in pitch. "How could you possibly know? Did you hear something? Are you on your way back?" Her questions tumbled out, one after another, a frantic search for a solution, for someone else to fix the problem she had created. She still didn't get it. She still saw me as a peripheral character, a handyman to be called when things broke. She couldn't conceive of me as the cause. "I'm not on my way back, Serafina," I said, keeping my voice level. "I'm at a diner about an hour away. I'm having a cup of coffee." I heard a sharp intake of breath on her end of the line. It was a sound of pure disbelief. "A diner? You're having coffee?" "Dad, my wedding is falling apart. The guests are leaving. Julian's parents look like they're about to have a heart attack. And you're just sitting somewhere having coffee?" The indignation in her voice was palpable. The sheer, unadulterated selfishness of her perspective was almost breathtaking. Her world was collapsing, so how dare mine continue to turn? "That sounds like a difficult situation," I observed, my tone devoid of any sympathy. "You should probably talk to the person in charge." This seemed to enrage her further. "I am talking to them. The planner is useless, the venue manager is nowhere to be found, and Julian is yelling at everyone. You have to do something. You're good at this stuff, fixing things. You have to come back and fix this." There it was again. The appeal to my utility, my function. Not an apology, not a question about why I had left, just a demand for my labor. She had put a sign on the door telling me I wasn't welcome, and now she was demanding I come back inside to serve her. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed with the force of a slammed door. The chaotic noise in the background seemed to fade for a moment, as if even the panicked guests were holding their breath. "What?" she whispered, the sound barely audible. "What did you say?" I leaned forward, my elbows resting on the sticky tabletop, bringing my mouth closer to the phone's microphone. I wanted to be sure she heard every single word, clearly, and without any room for misinterpretation. I said, "No, Serafina. I will not be coming back to fix anything. You made it very clear that I was not welcome at your wedding. I'm simply respecting your wishes." A strangled sound, half sob, half gasp, came through the speaker. "Respecting my wishes? You're ruining my wedding. This is my day, the most important day of my life, and you're destroying it out of spite, all because of a stupid joke." A joke. That's what she called it. That calculated act of public humiliation. A joke. The last vestiges of any lingering paternal softness in my heart turned to granite. "It wasn't a joke, Serafina. It was a statement. You made yours, and now I'm making mine. You don't get to banish the carpenter and then demand he come back to fix the house when the roof caves in. You have no right," she shrieked, her voice cracking with fury and desperation. "This has nothing to do with you. This is my wedding, at my venue. You have no right to do this to me." Her words, meant to wound me, were the final, perfect setup. It was the opening I had been waiting for, the cue for the reveal I had been planning in the back of my mind for the last hour. I felt a sense of profound, icy calm settle over me. This was the moment the game changed forever. Declan leaned in slightly, his eyes fixed on my face, sensing the shift in the conversation. "That's where you're wrong, Serafina," I said, my voice dropping to a low, conversational tone. The quietness of it was more menacing than any shout. "It has everything to do with me. You remember that bigger project I told you about? The one that was taking all my time and money?" I let the question hang in the air for a beat, letting her mind scramble to make the connection. I could almost hear the gears turning, the dawning, horrified realization. "The one I was preserving for the future?" I continued, twisting the knife slowly. "You're standing in it, sweetheart. You're standing on my property. This is my venue, and I am revoking my permission." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a void, a vacuum that sucked all the air out of the diner. The background noise on her end was gone. I could no longer hear the panicked guests or the shuffling feet. There was only a dead, heavy stillness. I had detonated a bomb in the middle of her life, and she was at ground zero, trying to comprehend the wreckage. I had not only taken away her perfect wedding, I had revealed that the very foundation of her fantasy was a lie, a gift from the man she had just tried to erase. The power she thought she had was an illusion. She was a guest in my house, and she had just been thrown out. I waited for a response, for a scream, for a sob, for anything, but nothing came. There was only the sound of her silent, stunned breathing on the other end of the line. After a full minute of that deafening silence, I reached out a steady hand and ended the call. The finality of ending the call echoed in the quiet diner. I placed my phone face down on the table, the small, decisive action feeling like setting a final, perfectly fitted stone into a wall. Declan let out a long, slow breath he seemed to have been holding for the entire conversation. He shook his head, a look of grim, astonished respect in his eyes. "Her venue," he said, his voice a low murmur. "All this time it was yours. Caleb, you are a master of the long game." I didn't feel like a master of anything. I felt like a man who had just performed a necessary, painful amputation on his own life. The phantom limb of my love for my daughter still ached, but the sickness was gone. Now, I just had to clean the wound and prevent further infection. "The power was just the first domino," I said, turning my attention back to the laptop. My fingers moved with renewed purpose, clicking through the folders on my screen. "A party can survive bad lighting. It can't survive without food and music. People will tolerate inconvenience, but they won't tolerate hunger and boredom." I found the file I was looking for. Catering services. It was the most expensive, most sought-after caterer in the state, another one of Serafina's non-negotiable demands. The final payment, a substantial 50% of the total cost, was due upon the successful completion of the event. That was the key. I dialed the number listed on the contract. A frantic-sounding woman answered on the first ring. "This is the catering office. How can I help you?" I could hear the same background chaos I'd heard on Serafina's call. "This is Caleb Vance," I said calmly. "I'm the client for the wedding at the Blackwood Manor. I need to speak with the owner immediately. It's regarding the contract." Her voice was tight with stress. "Monsieur Vance, thank you for calling. It is a catastrophe here. There is no power. We cannot cook. We cannot see. My husband is trying to manage, but the guests are agitated." "I understand," I said, cutting through her panicked explanation. "That is precisely why I am calling. Please, put your husband on the line." There was a muffled exchange in French, and then a man's voice, thick with a Gallic accent and exasperation, came on. "Vance, this is the chef. What is the meaning of this? My reputation is being destroyed. We cannot serve cold food to these people." I let him vent for a moment, listening to his tirade about culinary standards and the sanctity of a wedding feast. When he finally paused for breath, I made my move. "I'm calling to inform you of a material breach of our agreement," I said, my tone crisp and professional. That got his attention. "Breach? What breach? My team is here, ready to perform. It is your venue that has failed," he sputtered. "That's correct," I agreed. "The venue has failed, and as the owner of said venue, I am officially declaring the event cancelled due to unsafe conditions. Our contract is clear on what happens in a situation like this. I'm invoking that clause. The event is over." I didn't need to quote legal jargon. He knew. I could hear the fight go out of him, replaced by the cold calculation of a businessman cutting his losses. "Furthermore," I continued, pressing my advantage, "since the event was not successfully completed, the final payment is now void. I am, of course, willing to cover the cost of the food that was prepared, as a gesture of goodwill. But any further services are to cease immediately. I am instructing you to pack up your equipment and your staff and vacate the premises." A long, stunned silence followed. The chef was a businessman. He understood the cold, hard language of contracts. He knew I had him. "You are serious," he finally said, his voice flat, all the previous bluster gone. "As a heart attack," I replied. "Pack it up. Send me an itemized invoice for the raw food costs, and we'll consider our business concluded." I didn't wait for a reply. I simply hung up. I knew what would happen next. Men like him didn't build a successful business by being sentimental. He would give the order, and his well-trained staff would execute it with ruthless efficiency. The performance of the wedding feast was over. Now came the performance of the teardown. Inside the manor, the effect was immediate and devastating. The catering staff, who had been trying to placate guests with bread rolls and bottled water, suddenly changed their mission. With a discipline that was almost military, they began to clear the tables. They didn't just remove empty glasses, they removed everything. The beautiful untouched plates of food, the elaborate floral centerpieces, the fine silverware, all of it was swept away and loaded onto rolling carts. They moved through the murky darkness like a team of ghosts, dismantling the party piece by piece right in front of the horrified guests. The message was clear and brutal. The hospitality has ended. It was time to go home. The string quartet, seeing the caterers begin their exodus, quickly followed suit. Their leader, a pragmatic man who had seen his share of disastrous events, knew that when the food leaves, the money is not far behind. He gave a sharp nod to his musicians. They stopped trying to play in the dark, packed their precious instruments into their cases, and began wheeling their equipment toward the exit, their faces grim and determined. The last vestiges of the party's atmosphere vanished with them. The silence they left behind was filled with the awkward, shuffling sounds of 100 people who knew they had overstayed their welcome. The guests began to leave in a trickle, then a flood. They fumbled for their coats in the dark, their voices low and conspiratorial. They were no longer participants in a joyous occasion. They were survivors fleeing a shipwreck. The humiliation for Serafina and Julian was now absolute and public. Their dream wedding had become a legendary disaster, a story that would be whispered at cocktail parties and country clubs for years. As I was picturing the scene, Declan's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, and a slow grin spread across his face. Well, he said. The news is already hitting the wire. He turned the phone toward me. It was a screenshot of a Facebook post from a young woman I didn't know. There was a blurry photo of the darkened ballroom, a chaotic scene of phone flashlights and shadowy figures. Above the photo, the caption read, "At my cousin's insane wedding. Total blackout. Generators are dead, and the caterers are literally taking the food off the tables as we speak. Bride is in tears, and the groom is screaming at his own father-in-law. Never seen anything like it. #wedding from hell. #blackout bride." The post already had dozens of likes and a string of shocked comments. The evidence was now public, immortalized on the internet. My private grievance was now a public spectacle. My phone rang again. I glanced at the caller ID. It was Eleanor. I hesitated for a moment, then answered, a cold curiosity compelling me to hear what she had to say now. Her voice was different this time. The theatrical panic was gone, replaced by a low, trembling tone of genuine fear. "Caleb," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Caleb, you have to stop this. Please." I said nothing, letting her fill the silence. "I know why you're doing this," she continued, her words rushing out in a torrent. And you have a right to be angry. It was a terrible thing to do. We never should have done it." "We?" I asked, my voice like ice. "So you were a part of it then? The sign was your idea too?" I could hear her take a shaky breath. "No, not the sign, I swear. That was all Serafina and Julian. But I knew about it. I didn't try to stop them." Her confession hung in the air, a pathetic admission of her own weakness and complicity. "And why didn't you try to stop them, Eleanor?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Why would you let our daughter do that to me?" Her answer came in a broken sob. "Because of them, Caleb. Because of Julian's family. They're so important. So wealthy. Serafina wanted to impress them so badly. They look down on people like us, people who work with their hands. They made comments about you, about your truck, your job. Serafina was so afraid they would think less of her because of you. She thought, we all thought, that if we made it clear you weren't really a part of her new life, that you were just a distant figure, that they would accept her. She was crying freely now, the ugly, gulping sounds of someone whose careful calculations had all blown up in their face. And you knew, I said, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. You knew I owned the Blackwood Manor, didn't you? The silence on her end was my answer. Yes, she finally whispered. Serafina told me after you made the offer. I was shocked. I didn't know you had done so well for yourself. We thought you'd just take the insult and stay away quietly. We never dreamed that you could do this. The sheer, naked cynicism of it was staggering. They had known the truth. They had known they were standing on my generosity, accepting my greatest gift, while simultaneously planning to humiliate me at the door. They hadn't just underestimated me, they had shown a profound and utter contempt for me. It's too late for apologies, Eleanor, I said, my voice completely empty of emotion. You made your choice. You chose their world over your own family. Now you get to live with the consequences. I hung up the phone before she could reply, cutting off the sound of her pathetic sobs. I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, just a vast, cold emptiness where my family used to be. The diner felt suffocating. I needed to leave, to get back to my own space, to the solid, real things I had built with my own 2 hands. I threw a $20 bill on the table. Let's go, Deck, I said, already sliding out of the booth. As we stood up to leave, my phone buzzed one last time. It wasn't a call. It was a text message from a number I didn't recognize. My thumb hovered over the notification, a strange sense of dread prickling the back of my neck. I opened it. There was no text, only an image. It was a photograph, taken in the dark, illuminated by a harsh, direct flash. It took me a second to recognize what I was looking at. It was the door to my workshop, the heavy, reinforced oak door that I had built myself, or what was left of it. The wood was splintered around the lock, and the door hung crookedly on a single hinge, a dark, gaping hole where it had been forced open. My sanctuary, my private world, violated. My blood ran cold. A moment later, a second message came through from the same number. It was from Julian. The words were simple, a chilling promise of what was to come. You think your paperwork is armor? Let's see. The image on the phone screen burned itself into my mind. The splintered oak, the violated lock, the gaping darkness beyond. It was more than just a broken door. It was a desecration. My workshop was not just a place where I worked. It was the repository of my life. The one place on earth that was wholly and completely mine. Every tool on the pegboard, every half-finished project on the benches, every faint scar on the wooden floor told a story. It was the place I had taught Serafina how to hold a hammer. The place I had retreated to after my divorce from Eleanor. The place where the quiet, steady work of my hands had always brought me peace. And Julian, in his blind, spoiled rage, had kicked it all in. The cold resolve I had felt in the diner began to heat, transforming into something harder, sharper, and far more dangerous. It was the white-hot anger of a man whose sacred ground has been trespassed upon. The drive from the diner to my house was a blur of headlights and dark country roads. I pushed the old Ford harder than I had in years, the engine groaning in protest as the speedometer needle crept past 70. Declan sat in the passenger seat, his hand gripping the dashboard, his face a grim silhouette in the passing lights. He didn't speak, and I was grateful for his silence. There was nothing to say. The time for words was over. Julian had escalated this from a battle of contracts and finances into something primitive. He had come into my home. He had put his hands on my world. He thought he was delivering a counterattack, a show of force to intimidate me. The fool. He had no idea what he had just unleashed. He had mistaken a craftsman's patience for a weakness. He was about to learn the difference between a man who signs checks and a man who builds the very walls that hold up the roof. My property was dark when we pulled in. The familiar shape of my small house and the larger workshop behind it barely visible against the starless sky. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the frantic chirping of crickets. I didn't need the headlights to see the damage. The workshop door, my handiwork of solid 3-inch oak with reinforced steel fittings, hung open like a broken jaw. I walked toward it, my boots crunching on the gravel driveway, each step deliberate and heavy. The air smelled of pine needles and damp earth, but also something else. Something acrid and wrong. The scent of burnt paper. Declan followed a few steps behind me, his presence a silent, steady anchor in the swirling chaos of my thoughts. I stopped at the threshold, my hand resting on the splintered wood. The force required to do this had been immense, born of pure, witless fury. I stepped inside, my eyes slowly adjusting to the gloom. The interior was a disaster. My neatly organized tools were swept from their racks, scattered across the floor like fallen soldiers. Blueprints for a historic library restoration I was working on were torn from their tubes, ripped and trampled underfoot. A half-finished rocking chair, a piece I was carving from a single block of cherry wood, was overturned, its delicate rockers snapped. But it was the center of the room that drew my eye. My main safe, a formidable steel box set into the concrete floor, was scarred and dented, the combination dial smashed. At its base was a pile of charred paper, and the heavy steel door was blackened with soot. He had been looking for my armor. He had been looking for the paperwork. A strange, cold smile touched my lips. He had ransacked my sanctuary, desecrated my work, and committed at least 2 felonies, all in pursuit of a ghost. I knelt by the safe, my fingers tracing the scorch marks on the floor. The scorch marks on the documents he'd used as kindling showed the fire hadn't burned hot enough. It was a pathetic, desperate attempt that had failed to do anything but make a mess. He must have thought they were the contracts, the deeds, the proof he needed to destroy. He thought he had won. He didn't get in, Declan said, his voice low. He was right. The safe was damaged, but unopened. No, I said, rising to my feet. He didn't. I scanned the rest of the workshop, my gaze moving past the obvious destruction, looking for something else. My eyes landed on a high shelf near the back wall. An empty space. A small, unassuming wooden box, one I had made years ago from scraps of bird's-eye maple, was gone. It had contained nothing of value, just old photographs and a few of Serafina's childhood drawings. But Julian wouldn't have known that. He must have grabbed it, thinking it held something important. It was another miscalculation, another sign of his sloppy, panicked thinking. Just as the thought crossed my mind, the quiet of the night was torn apart by the squeal of tires. A sleek, silver sports car, Julian's, swerved into my driveway, its headlights cutting a blinding swath across the front of my house. It came to a screeching halt, and the doors flew open. Julian practically fell out of the driver's side, his tuxedo jacket gone, his tie askew. Serafina stumbled out of the passenger side, a ghost in her ruined white dress. Her face was pale and tear-streaked in the harsh glare of the headlights. They stood there for a moment, framed in the light, the picture of self-inflicted ruin. The second public humiliation was about to begin, and this time the audience was my entire neighborhood. Lights started to flick on in the houses up and down my quiet suburban street. Curtains were being drawn back. The show was starting. Julian strode toward me, his movements jerky and erratic. He was high on adrenaline and rage, a cornered animal ready to lash out. In his hand, He clutched a handful of charred, blackened papers. He stopped a few feet away from me, his chest heaving. Serafina hung back by the car, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were freezing. "Well, well, old man," Julian spat, his voice a ragged sneer. He shook the burnt papers at me. "Looking for this? Your precious armor? Doesn't look so tough now, does it? A little fire, and poof! All your leverage, all your pathetic little threats, all gone up in smoke." He was performing, projecting his voice for the audience of watching windows. He wanted them to see him as the victor, the one who had finally put the old carpenter in his place. I remained perfectly still, my hands resting at my sides. I didn't look at the papers in his hand. I didn't look at the broken door. I just looked at him, my expression unreadable. I let the silence hang in the air, letting his bravado curdle into uncertainty. He had expected me to rage, to protest, to be defeated. My calm was unnerving him. "I broke into your safe," he boasted, his voice a little too loud. "I found everything. The deed to the manor, all the contracts. And I burned them, every last one. There's no proof, nothing. It's my word against yours. Who do you think they'll believe? Me, or some washed-up handyman who crashed his own daughter's wedding?" Serafina let out a small, broken sob from beside the car. She was watching me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a desperate, flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, Julian had actually won, that he had somehow salvaged their perfect life from the ashes. I let Julian have his moment, let him preen and posture in the headlights. Then, when he had finally run out of words, I spoke. My voice was quiet, carrying easily in the still night air. "Is that all you found in there, Julian?" The question was simple, conversational, but it landed like a stone in a silent pond. He blinked, thrown off balance. "What? Yes, I found it all. I told you I burned it." "All of it?" I pressed, taking a slow step toward him. "You're sure you got everything?" A flicker of doubt crossed his face. "Of course I'm sure. I emptied the whole damn thing," he blustered. I nodded slowly, a faint, pitying smile on my face. "That's a shame," I said, "because you went to a lot of trouble. Breaking and entering. Arson. All for a box of worthless paper." Julian's face contorted in confusion. "What are you talking about? Those were the deeds. The contracts." I shook my head. "No," I said, my voice still quiet, still calm. "Those were my tax records from 1995. Expired warranties for tools I don't even own anymore. The original plans for a deck I built for a neighbor who moved away 10 years ago. The safe you spent all night trying to crack was a decoy, Julian. I keep my important papers somewhere else." The color drained from Julian's face. His bravado crumbled, replaced by a dawning, sickening horror. He looked from the charred papers in his hand to my face, his mind refusing to accept what he was hearing. Serafina took a stumbling step forward, her hand flying to her mouth. The watching neighbors, silent silhouettes in their windows, leaned in a little closer. The climax of the show was here. I turned my back on Julian and walked back into my workshop. I went to my main workbench, the one that had been in my family for 3 generations. I reached underneath the heavy maple top and pressed a small, almost invisible knot in the wood. There was a soft click, and a section of the pegboard wall behind the bench swung inward, revealing a cavity I had built into the concrete foundation of the building. Inside sat a second safe, smaller, sleeker, and untouched. I spun the dial, the familiar clicks echoing in the silent workshop. The heavy steel door swung open. I reached inside and pulled out a slim, leather-bound portfolio. I walked back to the doorway, holding the portfolio in my hand. I stopped in front of Julian, who was staring at the portfolio as if it were a venomous snake. "This," I said, tapping the smooth leather, "is my armor. The real armor. The notarized deed to the Blackwood Manor. The original, signed contracts with every vendor. Everything is right here. untouched, and I have digital copies of every page, stored on a server that you couldn't find with a map and a team of hackers. I then turned my gaze to my daughter, who looked as if she were about to collapse. Her last glimmer of hope had been extinguished. I took a step toward her, and she flinched. "And as for you, Serafina," I said, my voice softening just a fraction, but losing none of its steel, "we need to talk about that generous gift I gave you." I paused, letting the words sink in. "That check for your penthouse apartment. I told you it was to help you get settled, but I never transferred the title. I thought it was a wiser financial decision to keep a major asset like that in my own name, at least for a while. I guess that was a good decision, wasn't it?" The final blow landed. It was not a shout, but a quiet, devastating truth. I owned her wedding venue. I owned her home. She had nothing. Her entire life, the one she had been so proud of, the one she had been willing to disown me for, was a complete fabrication, owned and controlled by the very man she had tried to cast aside. Julian dropped the burnt papers, his hands falling limply to his sides. He had risked everything, committed multiple crimes for nothing. He was a fool, and now everyone knew it. Serafina finally broke. A raw, animal wail of pure despair tore from her throat, and she crumpled to the gravel driveway, her beautiful white dress pooling in the dirt around her. She had lost. She had lost it all. I looked down at the pathetic scene before me. The ruined bride sobbing on the ground, the impotent groom staring into the abyss of his own stupidity, all under the watchful, judging eyes of the entire neighborhood. My revenge was complete. It was not loud or violent. It was quiet, methodical, and absolute. I had not destroyed them. I had simply held up a mirror and forced them to see the truth of what they were. I looked from them to the broken door of my workshop. They had taken something from me tonight, a sense of peace, of sanctuary, but I had taken everything from them. I turned my back to the sound of my daughter's weeping. "You put a sign on my door," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the lawn. "Now get off my property." I walked back into my workshop, pulled the splintered door closed as best I could, and shut them out of my life for good. The weeks that followed were quiet. The silence left behind by the storm was a strange, hollow thing at first, but gradually it settled into a comfortable peace. I spent the day after the confrontation cleaning my workshop. I swept up the debris, righted the overturned furniture, and carefully placed each of my scattered tools back in its proper place on the pegboard. The last thing I did was build a new door. I chose the strongest piece of white oak I had in my stock, wood that had been curing for over a decade, and I forged the hinges and the lock myself. It was thicker and stronger than the last one, a silent testament to the lesson I had learned. Some things, once broken, must be rebuilt stronger than they were before. The news of what happened that night trickled back to me through Declan, who seemed to take a grim satisfaction in providing me with updates. The fallout had been swift and total. Julian's family, mortified by the public humiliation and the revelation of his criminal behavior, had cut him off completely. They paid for a lawyer, not to get him off, but to manage the damage to their family name as quietly as possible. He was facing charges for breaking and entering, destruction of property, and attempted arson. The vendors from the wedding, led by a particularly incensed chef, had filed a civil suit against both him and Serafina for the remainder of their fees, ensuring that any money Julian had left would be tied up in litigation for years. Serafina, I learned, had lost everything. The eviction notice for the penthouse had been served on Monday morning, as promised. With no money and no fiancé, she had been forced to move in with Eleanor into the same small guest room she had occupied as a teenager. The glittering future she had been so sure of had vanished overnight, leaving her with nothing but the ashes of her ambition. Eleanor had tried to call me a few more times. Her messages a pathetic blend of pleas and accusations. But I never answered. There was nothing left to say. They had made their world, and now they were living in it. One cool autumn evening, about a month after the wedding that wasn't, I was in my newly secured workshop. The scent of fresh-cut cherry wood filled the air, rich and sweet. I was working on the rocking chair, the one Julian had broken. I had managed to salvage the main frame, and I was carefully fitting a new, hand-carved rocker to the base. The work was slow, meticulous, and deeply satisfying. My phone, which sat on the workbench, buzzed with a text message. For a moment I considered ignoring it. My life had become blessedly free of electronic drama, but a quiet curiosity made me pick it up. It was from a number I didn't recognize, but I knew instantly who it was from. The message contained only 2 words. "I'm sorry." I stared at the words for a long time. "I'm sorry." 2 words that carried the weight of a lifetime of betrayal. 2 words that could mean everything or nothing at all. Was she sorry for what she had done? Or just sorry that she had been caught? Was she sorry for the pain she had caused me? Or just sorry for the life she had lost? I realized with a profound sense of peace that it didn't matter. Her apology, whether it was sincere or not, was irrelevant. It was a key to a door I had already sealed shut. Forgiveness was a bridge, and she had burned the land on her side of the canyon down to the bedrock. There was nothing to connect to anymore. I did not reply. I simply deleted the message, the same way I had deleted Eleanor's voicemails. I placed the phone back on the bench, screen down, and picked up my hand plane. I drew the sharp steel blade across the new cherry wood rocker, and a perfect, fragrant curl of wood peeled away. The sound was a soft, satisfying whisper in the quiet workshop. I was a builder. I had spent my life creating things of beauty and function from raw, unformed materials. My daughter and her husband had tried to tear my world down, but they had failed. Because my world was not built of illusions and appearances. It was built of solid oak and forged steel, of patience and hard-won skill. It was built to last. The sign they had hung at the wedding was gone, but I had built a new one, an invisible one, around the borders of my own peace. And this one I knew would never be broken. Caleb did what he thought was right, but was it too harsh? What would you have done in his shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow for more stories like this.